seconds to you. Cue her.
Good morning. I'm bringing you some sad and upsetting news.
From series like The Morning Show to TV classics like The Mary Tyler Moore Show, audiences have long been captivated by the fast-paced world of journalism. But behind the scenes, real-life newsrooms can be anything but glamorous.
It is tight deadlines and you cannot make an error, and it will happen because we're human, but it is high pressure.
While there isn't a widely recognized statistic proving journalists have a higher than average rate of alcohol addiction, research suggests that high-stress professions, especially those with irregular schedules and exposure to distressing content, carry an increased risk of substance use, including alcohol.
Journalists we used to be above Congress, but now we're below Congress as the most hated profession.
In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, reporter Megan Luther opens up about her personal battle with substance use disorder, her journey to recovery, and why she is now speaking out about a disease too often met with stigma. Well, Megan, welcome to Grieving Out Loud. Full disclosure here, you and I go way back. We've known each other for quite a few years. We both worked in journalism, and you continue, to work in journalism. I'm in the nonprofit world now, still using a lot of my journalism skills. But one thing I never knew about you is that I never knew that you struggled with alcohol. I had no idea until you kind of went public with that. And I was actually, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised because journalism is a really high stress profession, but I was surprised.
Yeah, I think there's, a stigma. You've talked about it before on your podcast of, you don't have a problem with alcohol until you're in a gutter, lost your kids, divorced, drinking out of a brown paper bag. And that's just not the case. I'm lucky that I found recovery and I had kind of the high bar because there's different bottoms for different people.
Yet everyone's story surrounding substances is unique. For Megan, she steered clear of alcohol throughout high school, a choice that wasn't always easy. But everything changed when she got to college.
I joke that I made up for it in college, but I did well in college. I got my master's, I did really well, and I really ramped up my drinking. My mom had died in a tragic car accident. I had just gotten engaged, and so I physically could not deal with the pain, and numbing was the only thing I knew how to deal with. And I was supposed to be planning a wedding. My mom's supposed to be part of that. And so drinking was how I got through the day, basically. So I would just get plastered at night. That was my thing. So I always said, I don't discriminate. I drink liquor, I drink beer, I drink wine.
Megan was 25 when she tragically and suddenly lost her mother. No matter the age, turning to substances after losing a loved one is not unusual. Here's Dr. Mark Vandebroek, a thanatologist or grief educator, on a previous episode of Grieving Out Loud.
I have found that over 70% of addictions are grief-based.
Well, sure, you're looking to drown out your sorrows. It's cliche, but it's true.
It is so true. Be it narcotics, be it alcohol, whatever it is.
Food, lots of things. Yeah.
I'll do everything I can not to deal with it.
This disease is really rooted in grief. If you really dig down, it could be trauma and the grief surrounding that trauma that happened to you. Maybe like for some people, losing their innocence because of abuse. I mean, there could be all kinds of reasons why people are grieving. But I think grief is something that if you don't want to really go into that dark place, and I know about those dark places of grief. I mean, anybody who's lost someone that they love very much knows how difficult it is, and you don't feel like you can survive. What have you since learned, on this journey that you've been on and into recovery about grief and addiction?
I've learned that grief is different for everyone. There's no proper way to grieve, and grief can sneak up on you. It can stay long. I didn't start feeling my quote unquote new normal until about 5 years after my mom's death. So it took a lot of therapy, a lot of intensive therapy. And when you do intensive therapy, typically therapists will tell you like it'll get worse before you get better because you're going through all of it. When I started therapy, then I had to start dealing with my sexual trauma when I was little. And so it's coping on that, you just kind of like open up the floodgates of what you have to deal with and realize what that's brought you. And so it goes back to the numbing part. I think numbing is the best word that I've heard as far as just, it is really tough to deal with things like sexual assault, with losing a loved one. And when you combine that and you're trying to get through the day, it is a legal, quote unquote, coping mechanism.
Yeah. And reliving that trauma. I mean, you hate to be re-traumatized, right? So there are certain ways, right ways to do it. If you're going to go back and try to face some of these things like you've experienced. In addition to coping with grief and sexual trauma, Megan stepped into a high-pressure career with tight deadlines. A 2020 Reuters Institute survey found that more than a third of journalists reported experiencing mental health issues, which could lead to more substance abuse. As a journalist for 35 years, when I started, it was so common. It was, first of all, it was the good old boys club. It was mostly men. It was just kind of coming out of that era when I started, like when I very first started. And there was smoking in the newsroom, it was smoke filled. Here I have asthma. I think they just banned smoking like in my first newsroom on my first week there, seriously. And the stories always were about all this, booze in the bottom file drawer. All these men had booze and they'd go out after the broadcasts and drink. It's been such a part of journalism. And I think journalists are under a lot of stress. It's a very demanding, high-stress job with tight deadlines, and people turn to alcohol as a way to cope, to relax, all of the things. But we don't always talk about it as journalists about ourselves. There may be journalists who are covering addiction, who are covering, the fentanyl opioid crisis like I did and all of these things, but they're not really talking about it among themselves.
They're not. And journalists are now, we used to be above Congress, but now we're below Congress as the most hated profession. So
I know it's horrible and least trusted and all of the
Yes.
things, and I think when you went to school for journalism and you try to do all the best practices, it's kind of sad.
It is sad. And, there's bad apples in every profession.
Sure.
But, so having that pressure and it is tight deadlines and you cannot make an error, and it will happen because we're human, but it is high pressure. And we always used to joke that, you might have a liquid lunch here or there. So go out for lunch and go to a bar, have a drink with your lunch. And then, I'm a better writer when I'm under the influence, which is a joke. I was a terrible writer during my drinking days and a much better writer now that I'm sober. So, and I always tell people when you try to control your drinking is when you know you have a problem. So I used to measure and okay, I'll only have 8 ounces today, or I'll only drink beer and I'll no longer drink liquor. And so I tried all those things for many years and it's just not possible for me. And so that's why it was time to quit.
What was that ultimate turning point in your mind for you? And how bad did it get before you got to that point?
I was at a worse bottom years before. And people in recovery talk about this. I had an epiphany moment. And it's actually, I had my last drink at a journalism conference in New Orleans. And so it wasn't my worst drink, but I told my boss, I think 3 years into my recovery, but he had made something, we were joking around the next morning about, oh, you never know what drunk Megan's going to say. And, I was giving a friend a hard time and the drunk Megan really hit me. And I'm like, I don't want to be drunk Megan. I don't want that name. So that really kind of hit me. It's like, all right, it's time. I'm tired.
Yeah, that's not how you saw yourself.
I came back from the conference. I was thinking, all right, Monday morning, I talked to my boss, apologize that I was drunk Megan or whatever. What am I going to tell him? What am I going to say? And then I woke up at 3 a.m, which I usually am a heavy sleeper. And I woke up at 3 a.m. and I sat up in bed and I just thought, I have to get sober. And it just kind of hit me over the head, frankly. And I've talked to quite a few people in recovery that have had the same, just this real epiphany. And it kind of hit me over the head. And then the next day I went to my first meeting.
Just a turning point. You shifted, right?
Yep.
Something inside you shifted.
Uh-huh. And I am one of the super weird ones. I went to my first recovery meeting and then the next day I tested positive for COVID and then the world shut down. So I actually got sober in March of 2020.
Oh, that is unusual because actually more people started drinking and turning to alcohol during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Realizing she had a problem and needed help, was a big first step for Megan, but that was only the beginning. She still had to do the work, not just to overcome substance use disorder, but to finally face her grief.
I guess there's a right or wrong way to do grief, but I just tried to show up to my therapist. Honestly, there are times that you just don't want to get out of bed and you don't want to deal with life. And, you think a lot of people don't understand. So just trying to get out of bed, go to my therapist. I didn't cancel. Sometimes I didn't make it physically there. So she did on the phone because I literally could not get out of bed. But I will tell you that I realized, this is my first big tragedy. So I hadn't really dealt with death. I had some grandparents, but they were older. And so you realize that this happens to a lot of people and the world continues on. What really helped me is helping others. Like the empathy part of me, I was like, all right, this is not the end of my story. My mom would not want this to be the end of my story. And so you got to kind of persevere and get through it. But it is not easy.
I think it's really important to stress the help of the therapist because most people can't do that, can't go through the darkness or dive back into the darkness alone.
Absolutely. And I did a combination of medication and therapy. I think there's a stigma with antidepressants. And I always tell people, you would never tell a diabetic not to take insulin. And so when you are suffering from depression, you take medication and you do a combination of what worked for me is a combination of therapy and medication.
And I think the same can be said for if you need medication for alcoholism or opioid use disorder. I mean, there are medications out there that can help with this disease of the brain, and those need to be destigmatized, just like medications for mental health. And all of these things, of course, are intertwined, mental health and substance use disorder.
Absolutely. And there's been studies that show that the vast majority of those with substance use disorder have struggled with mental health, whether that's during their heights of their addiction or before. And you're right, it's very intertwined.
As one of the nation's strongest financial organizations, First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card have the strength to do good. We support nearly 700 organizations and nonprofits. Our employees give more than 30,000 volunteer hours annually. And we are continually seeking ways to make South Dakota an even better place to live. It's the Premier way. First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card.
Yeah. So also the other thing that you did that I really admire is that you decided to go public with your story. And that's how I actually found out. You shared something on Twitter and I was like, oh, I didn't know this about Megan. And of course, with the work that I'm doing, I'm very interested in your story and your story of survival and recovery. Why did you decide to post about it?
It took me a while. I was 3 years sober, and I think a couple of things into play. One, relapse is very prevalent. So it's like, oh, I don't, want to post in case I relapse or whatever. And I live in Mitchell. I live in a small town. I was afraid of the stigma. I live in a profession. I work in a profession. I was afraid of that stigma. So it was really heavy on me. But I had a friend a young woman who's also a mother, who was very open about it. And every time she posted about it on Facebook, inevitably, someone would reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling with alcohol. What advice do you have? And so, silence is deadly and silence can kill. And I think if we are quiet about it, then people really feel alone. And I think for me, it was very helpful to find other women, mothers who battle addiction, and then also journalists. And so I think the more open we are about it, it destigmatizes it. But then the most important thing is I'm helping others. So if there's a silver lining to my addiction is that if I'm public, then it can help others fight theirs.
That's what I say about Emily's death. And as the family member of someone who was suffering from substance use disorder, ultimately killed her, helping others helps me. I always say that. And I don't think there's any silver lining to losing my daughter, but it is the one thing that I can hold on to that helps my survival in all of this too, is just knowing I can help even just one other person, one mother, or stop one person from dying, then, it does truly help me. I get that. The other thing I wanted to say about the anonymous part is that my grandfather was really big into Alcoholics Anonymous back in 1950. And I remember everybody was so embarrassed in my family. My mother would tell stories about his alcoholism and how embarrassing it was, right, when he was drunk and the things that happened. And he was so proud of it. And he always talked about Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was in recovery for years. When I, was a little kid and older, I never saw him drink, but the anonymous part of it. So I think I understand not everybody has to talk and not everybody has to tell their story. And if you're not comfortable being public about it, no one should force you to be. But I also think the anonymous part keeps the shame and keeps it hidden in darkness.
It does. And like you said, each their own. And I felt empowered, on my 3-year anniversary to tell it. But I think especially for women, especially for moms, we're supposed to be super moms and infallible. And I think just going public, women are a growing trend in alcohol use disorder. I read this amazing book. It's called Quit Like a Woman. And it talks about, one, how women process alcohol differently. Our bodies metabolize it differently. And so that's why, one drink gets us drunker faster than a male body. But also it talks about how there's been a huge lobbying effort and a huge commercial effort by the liquor lobby and the alcohol industry to target women. That's why you see like the flavored seltzers and things like that. So the book is super knowledgeable on the increase of advertising. And we are a growing group, especially with binge drinking. And I think it's just not talked enough about. No,
you're right. And it's so heavily marketed. It's such a big part of our culture, Wine Wednesdays, mommy juice, all these kind of things. I had a liver doctor on this podcast, and she was talking about the increase in liver disease among women and how women are drinking at higher rates and they're now catching up. Men used to be heavier drinkers and now women are catching up to that, but how bad it is for women to do that. And they end up, with liver disease. And I think women aren't thinking that way when it's being sold to you and marketed to you like, oh, this is just what everybody does. And socially, it's so accepted. I'm guilty of having wine at social events. And, it's just like, that's just what you do, right?
Yeah. And one of the things about getting sober during COVID was I didn't have to go to social events. So I didn't have to deal with that because it makes people uncomfortable when you're drinking.
It does. If you're not drinking,
yes,
it makes people uncomfortable.
And they want to know why.
Yeah.
They want to know why. And while it's none of their business, I will tell people like I'm allergic to alcohol, which I am.
I'm allergic to beer, literally wheat. I'm allergic to wheat. So,
and typically I have found in my years and anecdotally that people who are most uncomfortable with me not drinking are people themselves who struggle with alcohol. And frankly, I look back to years ago when I was a drinker, I was uncomfortable around sober people because I didn't want to be judged. And it's like, well, maybe that's a sign that I need to look within.
Even though they probably weren't judging you. You know what I'm saying? It's just that your idea was you kind of in the back of your mind knew. You knew. Part of you knew, right? And so that makes people uncomfortable when they are questioning themselves. Am I okay? Or do I have a problem? And how come this person isn't drinking? And that's just what we do. We drink. And, it's a complicated social thing.
Well, it's really hard for you internally to decide if I'm a problem drinker or not when it's so celebrated and part of rituals. And it's weird if you have a wedding without alcohol. Right. It's weird if you have a child's birthday without adult drinks, alcohol drinks at a child's birthday.
Well, that's weird too, because it never used to be that way, but it's definitely that way now.
Yeah.
Where if you had a kid event, even, hockey games with kids, they serve alcohol now, or parties and different birthday parties, there's alcohol there for the adults. But I'm just kind of shocked by that. Like, why do you need to have alcohol to celebrate with your kids or to do a family thing?
Yeah. We used to joke like, so we can survive a child's birthday party with all the screaming. But it's, again, it goes back to the coping mechanism, but not healthy in my opinion. And it wasn't healthy for me either.
Right. And what keeps you in recovery?
I think fear keeps me in recovery. It is no coincidence that I've professionally done the best I've ever done the last 4 years. My first year sober, my boss actually commented, he's like, oh man, you've had a banner year. Like this has been your best year yet. And it's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
So work, I'm a better parent. I'm happier. Like alcohol is a depressant. Alcohol is a toxin. Like our bodies are not meant to take in alcohol. And so I'm just happier. I don't wake up hungover. I don't wake up sick. I enjoy mornings now. I enjoy life. So I'm a happier person. I'm more content. I'm healthier. So there's so many good things going for me that I can't imagine going back. But addiction is addiction and relapse is very common. So one of the things that has helped me is I focus on it. I have, kind of a devotion that I read every day, a daily reminder. I have a sponsor. I attend meetings. And the biggest thing that I say, and my therapist calls it a blessing, which I do believe it's a blessing, is I have nightmares of relapse. I have relapse nightmares, and they are very detailed and they're horrifying. And it's one of those nightmares where you wake up and you believe it happened because it was so real. And then it is a huge relief to finally realize it is not real. I did not relapse. I'm here. I'm still sober. One more day. And sometimes I tell people, especially in the beginning, it's taking sometimes hour by hour or minute by minute. Like, I need to stay sober in this minute or in this minute, because it's really just something in your brain that you cannot forget and can't stop thinking about at times.
What about the people around you? Have they been supportive? Your friends and family?
What's interesting is most of them were surprised. I think we keep it hidden. And like I said, I wasn't in a gutter. I wasn't drinking.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Highly functioning.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for so many people who suffer with this disease. I mean, and it's so socially acceptable to drink. So there are a lot of people out there functioning and going about their jobs and doing the things, but it's definitely a problem.
Yeah. So a lot of people were surprised, and then, supportive, but it's different because I was the partier. I was the life of the party. I love buying people drinks. I love buying people shots. Like, it's different. You lose friends, but I would argue those friends weren't meant to be. Like, people who I thought were my friends were basically drinking buddies. And so relationships change and some people get weirded out by it. But having it during COVID, you kept your group very close knit because you weren't going out and socializing. So you kind of found out who are the people for you and who you could rely on.
Are you passionate about keeping kids safe and informed? Emily's Hope is proud to introduce our K-5 substance use prevention curriculum, designed to educate young minds about the dangers of substance use. This engaging program lays the foundation for a healthy future. Visit emily'shopeedu.org to learn more and help bring this vital resource to your local schools. Encourage your school administrators and counselors to explore our curriculum today. It's part of our mission. Together, we can make a difference. In addition to openly sharing her struggle with substance use disorder, Megan joined the advisory committee of Journalists Recovery Network, a support community for journalists in recovery. The group was founded by Taylor Six, a crime and courts reporter for the Lexington Herald-Leader, who has also battled alcohol addiction.
And she realized that it happens a lot in our industry, but no one talks about it. And so she had asked me to kind of come and help. And our goal is to let journalists know that there are people out there. And, it always helps to talk to someone who understands what you're going through. They understands the deadlines, the hatred, the pressure, and why we unwind with the evening cocktail at the end of the day when we file our story. So that is available for any journalist confidentially who wants to reach out and just talk to someone who's been there and done that.
For more information about Journalists Recovery Network, check out the show notes for this episode. While you're there, we'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate the podcast, leave a review, and share it with friends and family. Together, we can help break the stigma around addiction, recognize it as the brain disease it truly is, and help more people get the help they so desperately need. And that must be rewarding work as well. I mean, you're helping other people. And what kind of response has that effort been getting?
We've had people reach out, and we've had people who are in editor positions. We've had people from different countries reach out. And so, Taylor's done an amazing job. It was covered by Pointer. Pointer did an article about it, and that's how I found out about it. And I reached out to her. And so, we're just in the beginning stages, but the goal is to provide that lending ear. We don't do treatment, but we've, experienced it and probably experienced some of the issues that people are dealing with now.
It's peer support is what it is.
Exactly.
It's peer support.
Exactly.
As a journalist, Megan has also used her work to shed light on the devastating impact of addiction.
I'll ever be hitting them with James ever again.
That's Taylor Nielsen, a South Dakota man who suffered from liver disease caused by alcohol. Sadly, he died at just 35 years old. Megan followed his journey as he spoke out, determined to show others the deadly reality of alcohol addiction. It was an amazing piece where you dove in to what a huge problem this is, especially in the state of South Dakota. I mean, it's one of the worst states for death from liver disease, correct?
It is. And him and his dad, Dave Nielsen, were very generous with their time and their story. And I approached them about, would you be willing to share it? And so I spent a lot of time with them in several days, over several months. I was with him in the hospital when he was in Omaha, trying to see if he qualified for a new liver. And then I started digging into the data and found that for the first time ever, the leading cause of death of South Dakotans in their 30s is liver disease. And the vast majority of that is alcohol-induced liver disease. And it's also the leading cause of death of South Dakotans in their 40s. And so we have a huge problem, and we have people who are supposed to be in the prime of their life, 30s and 40s, dying from alcohol-induced liver disease. So Taylor was very generous where he shared the good, bad, and ugly. And there are some really ugly moments that he went through and his dad went through. But the goal was for them to maybe save a life or to help a family member who's dealing with a loved one with an addiction.
And he died before he could get a liver transplant.
He did die before he could get a liver transplant. He was denied a transplant. He didn't qualify at the time. And so, I followed him as he worked through recovery and worked on his health. And ultimately, he did succumb to the disease.
Sadly, Taylor's story is becoming all too common. According to the South Dakota Department of Health, deaths related to alcohol liver disease have increased more than 200% within 10 years, from 90 deaths in 2012 to 285 in 2021. Of course, this isn't just a South Dakota problem. Across the nation, liver disease among young Americans, particularly younger women, is surging. On a previous episode of Grieving Out Loud, I sat down with Dr. Jessica Mellinger, a liver specialist at the University of Michigan. She's witnessed a 60% increase in waiting lists for transplants for patients with alcohol hepatitis.
At what point are people at risk for liver disease?
So it depends. So there's some differences in, I think probably one of the biggest factors that can influence, how much is too much is if you're a man or a woman. When we think about the NIAAA or the National Association for the Study of Alcohol here in the U.S. through the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, their recommendations for a safe level of alcohol for people who don't have an alcohol use problem, who don't have liver disease, who don't have medical issues from alcohol, is no more than 1 drink a day for women or 2 drinks a day for men. And then that raises the question of what is a drink, right? So it's 1 drink is about 4 ounces of wine. So that would fill up really only the bottom, right?
Yes. You think about a typical wine glass. And so, if I'm going to fill up a wine glass, I'll fill it up about halfway full, which is 2 servings, right?
Probably 2 servings, yeah.
Wow.
And then 1 shot is 1 serving. 1 standard 12-ounce can of beer is 1 serving. That's the typical kind of percentage of alcohols that we have had in the past. A lot of the newer IPAs and the microbrews and so forth have actually a higher concentration of alcohol in them. So you may have a beer, 1 serving of one of those more highly concentrated alcohol drinks and be getting 2, 3 or more, servings of alcohol in that. So for women, for a variety of reasons, our body size, largely how we process alcohol, where the enzymes to process alcohol are in our body and how many of them there are, how much of them there are in our stomachs and in our livers, we can't drink as much as men and about half as much as men before we start to see the consequences. So if you, from a liver disease standpoint, let's say, if you drink heavily, more than 2 or 3 drinks per day for several weeks, you will get fatty liver from that. So there will be fat accumulated in your liver in 90% of people. We'll get that.
If you'd like to listen to the full episode, The Silent Crisis of Alcohol and Women's Liver Disease, we've shared a link in the show notes of this podcast.
In that story, also, we talked about the sales tax data showing a huge jump in, liquor purchases in the state of South Dakota. And they have not gone down to pre-pandemic levels. Like everyone knows that alcohol use was up during COVID, but we have not reset in South Dakota, and we continue to buy large amounts of alcohol and haven't gone down to the pre-2020.
What's interesting is that nationwide, deaths, the number 1 cause of deaths of people 18 to 45 is fentanyl. We talk about that all the time, on this podcast, but here in this state, you're telling me for 30 and 40-year-olds, it's actually alcohol.
Yeah, I thought maybe it would be cancer or car accidents. So I was really surprised. And when I saw that stat, I was like, well, this is how we tell the story. Because you could write a story and the lead be about the number one cause of death. But I think the way to get readers to understand how big a problem that is to tell it through a human being. And Taylor was generous enough to do that.
Yeah, it just broke my heart. What was he, 35?
He was 35.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
How wonderful that his family, even though they knew the outcome could be the worst, willing to share it with people as well to help others. So those stories must be told. Was it difficult for you to tell that story?
I thought, I will say one of the things is I don't think Taylor would have told me his story if I wasn't in recovery. Because, it's really hard for someone to understand how the brain and the body works when it comes to addiction unless you've been there. And so I don't think he would have talked to me if I wasn't in recovery. And this story was a turning point for me too, because, in journalism, we talk about being objective and neutral. And so I had disclosed for the first time in a story that I was in recovery. And one, I thought was important because I want to be transparent. But two, I don't think I would have had this story otherwise if I wasn't in recovery and being open and honest. So I also think that destigmatizes. And I think that's why we have editors. I had an editor who went through it. And if he thought that my quote unquote bias of being in recovery was influencing the story, that's why editors check you. But I think journalism is gradually getting there. But I think we need to really examine that people's experiences make them really good reporters and help them understand complexities of all sorts of issues. And it doesn't mean that they're biased. It just means that they're knowledgeable. And that's why you have an editor to check that bias. And that's why, you can do disclosures and be transparent about it.
Was there any fallout from you disclosing that or even going public as you did on social media? Was that a year or so ago?
Yeah, no, thankfully I have not had any fallout that I know of. I mean, I don't know if anyone's not accepted a pitch for me because of that, or, I've lost a freelance job because of that. But so far, people have been very generous and very kind about it. And most importantly, I've had people who have reached out and said, hey, I have a problem. And I immediately say, let's schedule a meeting. Let's get coffee. Let's talk about it. And that's frankly one of my favorite parts of recovery is just being there, because I've been there and it's really freaking lonely. And to have someone talk to you about it, I think is how we kind of battle these diseases of addiction.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and for the work that you're doing to draw attention to problems like this one, like with this article on Taylor and the other things. I know, but you've got future projects coming up, so I look forward to seeing those as well.
Absolutely. One of the things I'm working on is obviously we have a problem. So what's the solution? We don't just want to point out the flaws in our society. We want to find out, well, what is working and what solutions are we working on? So that's the goal.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
And thanks for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. You can find more episodes, check out my blog, and stay up to date on the latest news about substance use disorder and the opioid epidemic on our website, emily'shope.charity. If you or a loved one struggle with addiction, please get help immediately. Don't wait. Remember, you're not alone. Your life matters. Until next time, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wanenberg King and Marley Miller. Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K-12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emily'shopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe.